Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. I've highlighted the plight of Western Canadians many times on this program. For example, how it seems at every turn Alberta is blocked from getting its oil to market. How to the west it seems that Ottawa is not paying attention to their needs, their cries for the government to do something, spawning a movement called Wexit. And now we have a new U.S. administration which immediately canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. And then the governor of Michigan, who has given notice to Enbridge that they will shut down the Line 5 easement come May, a major pipeline which feeds into Canada and also into the U.S. So how will Alberta get its oil and gas products to market with these challenges and at times literal roadblocks? Is Western alienation a growing concern which will continue to fuel calls for Wexit? And what, if anything, is the federal government doing about this? Well, joining me now to share her experience and insight into the oil and gas sector in Alberta is Danielle Smith, former politician, media personality, and Western Canadian commentator. I guess we'll start with a general overview. What is the state of oil and gas sector here in Canada right now?
You know, it's funny because I feel really optimistic that Alberta is just set to boom, especially since there has been a bit of a change in attitude with the new Natural Resources Minister, Seamus O'Regan. I think we're seeing a bit of a departure from some of the language that we had in the past, where it seemed like the future of energy in Canada was expected to be hydroelectric power, where it's already been established, but any new power had to be wind and solar. But what I hear out of Seamus O'Regan is talking about a natural gas strategy, and Alberta is a natural gas basin. We have the potential for LNG exports, which is very positive. We have a new and burgeoning hydrogen potential as well with blue hydrogen. So on that front, I think is all very positive. Where we also have established oil development with our oil sands, and so we have a pretty good base. I think where people are feeling incredibly frustrated is that we know that we could do so much more, we could produce so much more, we could export so much more, and yet every time there's a promising new pipeline to take our product to another market, it seems like it becomes a huge target for attack from the environmental movement.
Right.
And we have a lot of skepticism that any of them are going to get built.
Okay, well, I appreciate your comments here because I feel like I'm more of a doom and gloom kind of person when we're thinking about Alberta oil and gas, but it sounds like there is hope for some optimism and to be optimistic here, and that's a good thing. When obviously, just to frame the discussion, for example, in 2019, Canada's oil and gas exports are valued at $102 billion, representing about 20% of our total exports in Canada. So it is our largest export, and I think that's an important thing to remind our viewers when we're discussing this topic. Let's talk about the new administration in the United States. Day one, President Biden cancels Keystone XL. What a blow, a moral blow, obviously a practical one when we can't get our oil out. What does that mean for our oil and gas sector?
The real problem, I think, with that issue is that it seemed to catch the industry off guard. It was pretty obvious that there was a major environmental coordination taking place behind the scenes to cause Joe Biden to do that on day one. 350.org, for instance, issued a tweet and press release about how happy they were with the decision. But the real problem is that once they move and get their success on one pipeline, they just move on to the next one. And so Line 5 is in the sights of the extreme environmental movement. We've had approvals for Line 3, which is another major export pipeline that they want to cancel. We still have not got the expansion for the Trans Mountain to the coast completed yet. And we saw that other promising pipeline projects in Canada that would have given us Canadian energy security, the Northern Gateway Pipeline and the Energy East Pipeline, those ended up getting canceled because of foot dragging and direct federal government decisions. So I think there's this suspicion that Joe Biden was doing Justin Trudeau a favor, that Justin Trudeau didn't do anything to challenge that decision when it came out. You would have thought that if these two had such a great friendship and relationship, it wouldn't have been the first decision that Joe Biden would have made. He would have at least waited to talk with Justin Trudeau about the change in our industry, the importance of having this pipeline built, the mutual benefit we have, the improved environmental aspects associated with this pipeline, but none of that happened. And then very, very quickly, all the wagons circled to try to get everyone from not only the government, but also all the environmental groups, as well as our own Canadian ambassador to the United States saying, oh, well, he campaigned on it, so we should just move on within days. So I think that was a real slap in the face. And I think it's why people are very feeling like if Joe Biden continues to press forward with some of these cancellations, we're not going to have an ally.
Welcome back. We're discussing the oil and gas sector here in Canada and the stoking of Wexit sentiments in Western Canada. And joining me is Danielle Smith. Thank you again, Danielle, for joining us for this discussion. And, just before we went to commercial, we were discussing the U.S. President Joe Biden and his immediate cancellation of Keystone the moment he came into office. You suggested that caught people off guard. It seemed that he was campaigning hand in hand with a lot of these environmental activists. So I was not caught off guard. But what has been, if anything, the Trudeau reaction to this? You said that they sent their ambassador to kind of do some things. Has he picked up the phone? Has he spoken to Joe Biden? What can we expect? Will there be a reversal on this?
Well, if there's a reversal on it, it's going to come from the U.S. governors. I mean, here's the interesting part is that I went to a number of different industry events that I had to speak at in the last month following the cancellation. And I asked the industry players, why weren't you fighting this? Why weren't you doing the lobbying? And quite literally, they said, we didn't think it would actually happen, that he wasn't actively campaigning on it, that they didn't think that that this would be a decision on day one, which really surprised me because, of course, Joe Biden was with the Obama administration and reversed it. And it seemed like it was going to be one of those touchstones for, the previous administration is now gone and there's a new sheriff in town. But I think perhaps the reason why the industry was taken by surprise is that Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has done a tremendous job in building a coalition of allies to our south, not only among governors, but also among all of the various trade associations that stood to end up getting high-paying jobs out of the construction of that pipeline. There are 11,000 jobs in the U.S. that were eliminated with that decision. And so the interesting part about it is that while all the messaging in Canada has been around move on, this is what he campaigned on, we can't change it, get over it, there are bigger priorities, that is not the case in the United States. Led by Montana and Texas, there's 21 attorneys general who have launched a legal challenge to challenge Joe Biden's cancellation of that presidential permit. Because let's face it, the presidential permit really only covers the portion of the pipeline that goes across the border.
Right. All
the heavy lifting on the pipeline approval, all of the environmental issues, all of the routing issues, that's been shouldered by the states. And they're not happy with the decision. So that's what we've got to watch for. As much as the Canadian government wants to move on, the U.S. states certainly don't, and that I think is an advantage for Alberta and for Saskatchewan in trying to make sure that pipeline gets built.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because I think there are a lot of sentiment on the ground is that this is a done deal, the case is closed. But I'm glad to hear that there are American governors not taking this lying down and are going to be fighting back. And it sounds like Jason Kenney is also trying to do his part. Justin Trudeau, again, is he going to do something? Can something be done? Can he pick up the phone as the head of state and do something for us?
He could, but will he? I guess that's the question. I think Line 5 is a little more complicated for the Prime Minister because it's going to massively impact Ontario and Quebec. And so we see completely different messaging and language around that. And even when Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan said that he was going to be fighting for Line 5, he said, this is a completely different case than Keystone XL because it's an existing pipeline. I don't think that they're all that different. And I think the fact that Trudeau didn't fight on Keystone XL makes it more likely that they're going to succeed in pulling the permit on Line 5, which, again, just to underscore, would have a devastating effect on Ontario and Quebec. 40 to 50% of the fuel coming in for diesel, gasoline, 100% of the aviation fuel at Toronto Pearson Airport. Well, people might be thinking, we can't really travel right now anyway. It's a massive amount of cargo that goes through Toronto Airport. So this is going to have a huge, huge impact. And so I'm glad to see that they have found their voice and are fighting on that issue. But I think they should learn the broader lesson that you've got to fight every single one of these reversals because if you don't fight one, then it's going to lead to another.
I agree. I think all of these, they're not small issues, but all of these issues do add up to something bigger, and that speaks to our Canadian energy security, even our continental energy security. So let's talk about Line 5. We only have about a minute before commercial, but just to frame this for our viewers. So Michigan Governor, and maybe I'll just frame it and then we'll pick it up when we come back. But Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, so she declared that she was going to cancel the easement for Line 5 and gave 180 days notice to Enbridge, which owns that pipeline, that she's going to cancel that easement, and she ordered them to cancel and turn off that pipeline. I know I believe there are some steps coming down the pipe, excuse the pun, legally. But to me, this was shocking, and we're going to pick this up when we come back. But when shutting down Line 5, I mean, Michigan itself derives 55% of their propane energy needs from this Line 5. It seems like a no-brainer that they would harm themselves, let alone, obviously, this would cause catastrophic results here in Ontario and Quebec. And we're going to talk about exactly those catastrophic results right when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. Once again, we're joined by Danielle Smith, who we're discussing actually right now the Line 5. This is the infamous, I suppose, pipeline that comes through Michigan. Actually starts in Alberta, renamed something else. It comes through the northern USA, comes through the upper peninsula of Michigan, and then comes and connects through Sarnia. But this line, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle, feeds 100% of the, not just the Canadian Toronto Pearson Airport and energy needs, fuel needs, but also the Detroit Airport as well.
Oh, I mean, like this is going to be significant impact to both nations, and that's the thing that's so surprising about it is that Gretchen Whitmer, the governor, would take a decision that was going to have such huge impact in her own state to her own residents. Now she's coming up with a proposal for how she would fill that gap, but it's sort of fascinating to me that you would have a governor who did an emergency order just over a month ago because of concerns about propane supply because of a cold snap. She didn't want her people to freeze. They need it for heating. And so these are the things that are quite shocking, really, is the level of ideology that is going into these decisions that are going to be harming the consumers in both of our countries. And you saw the same thing in Texas. They've been on a huge run to try to bring more renewable energy on side. Well, then guess what? When their natural gas plants failed, wind and solar weren't there for them either. They had to rely on natural gas imports from Canada to fill the gap. Look what's happened with the Suez Canal being blocked.
Right.
What were all the stories about? Stories were about the number of tankers that were not able to get oil through to not only European destinations, but critically to Syria, which relies almost 100% on Iran for its energy supplies. So there is ideology. And then part of what is happening is the world and the weather is teaching us a lesson about just how valuable these fossil fuel resources are. The problem is that you've got politicians who are not acting in the best interest of their citizens, and they're creating a situation where they're going to create more energy insecurity. In the middle of summer, you end up with heat waves that can end up causing, if you have a disruption in your electricity grid, you could end up with deaths. In winter, you end up with a disruption in your heating supply, you can end up with deaths. I mean, these are getting to be very, very serious issues. And I think that's the real lesson for me, is how far is ideology going to go before some kind of sanity kicks in. I feel like we might be on the cusp of seeing some return to reality, but you never know. I would never have expected it to be taken this far, that an existing pipeline from 1953, it's never had a major spill, that it would be facing this kind of closure, even though nobody stands to win from it.
No, it's utterly shocking, and I agree with you in some twisted way. Thank goodness that there was that sudden cold snap in Texas, but also in Michigan that forced that emergency order that maybe kicked some reality into people's minds, saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be cutting off this very important pipeline that feeds us. And I guess that lends to my next question, and we're going to get on to Wexit in a moment, but when I think of the energy security we need, and the energy independence we need, I feel like we do need a North American plan. And when we have our American neighbors to the south coming up with their own, perhaps ideologically driven, or it sounds ideologically driven, agenda with what they think our oil and gas needs should be and how we should pursue that. And then we have Canada operating on its own. I mean, we have pipelines crossing all these borders, all sorts of state borders, but also our national borders. How can we come up with like a North American-wide energy strategy? And I think that's what's needed here.
It certainly is. And it has to be led by Eastern Canada, I'm afraid to say. I mean, this is one of the dangers if we do not have a prime minister standing up for the industry as a whole and recognizing that we all benefit from a national energy security plan, is that Albertans are taking the view, well, maybe Line 5 should shut down. Maybe that would give an indication to Ontario and Quebec about how important it is that they rely on not only this fuel, but how much of it comes from Western Canada. And I heard that sentiment expressed many times. I don't think it should have to come to that. I think really there should be some recognition that we are all better off if we're able to support each other and our industries. There's a lot of manufacturing goods that come out our way to assist in the development of pipelines. There's a lot of well-paid union jobs that benefit from this industry having vibrancy and success. And so it shouldn't be pitting one part of the country against the other. I don't think that citizens do, but I do think politicians play that game. And I think they've played it for too long. And now we're at a point where we've got to take a different solution. Because if 100% of our product has been going to the US, now the US is getting protectionist, that's going to put our exports at risk, but it's also going to put imports at risk in Ontario and Quebec. And that's going to put our entire economy at risk just at a time when we're turning the corner on COVID and we could be kicking on all cylinders. So are we going to see that kind of national esprit de corps? I don't know. It starts in Ontario, Quebec, and I don't know that I've seen it yet.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about this right when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. We're going to delve into the topic of Wexit here with Danielle Smith. And again, thanks, Danielle, for joining us as we wrap up this conversation. After the 2019 federal election, the talk of Wexit really heated up. Is this still very much a thing in not just Alberta, but all Western Canada?
It's funny, I've watched the separatist sentiment in Western Canada go up and down. It's normally never gotten higher than about 25 or 30%. So if it came to a vote, I suspect that most Albertans would say, no, we don't want to Wexit. We just want a new relationship with the rest of the country, one based on mutual respect. I think the real problem is Albertans don't quite understand why the rest of the country hates us, I think. I don't know if it's envy. I don't know if maybe we had too much hubris and too much wealth. But we, I think, took the attitude after the national energy program caused such devastation was let's just keep our heads down. Let's just keep on making money. Let's be a good contributor to Confederation and not complain too much about it. And that didn't seem to be enough. It seems, I think what really happened is when Francois Legault got elected and wanted to continue to keep equalization payments coming and see them increase at the same time as he said, Alberta, we don't want your dirty oil. And so I think that's where the relationship broke down is I feel like it's been more from the East rejecting the partnership as opposed to Alberta rejecting the partnership.
Yeah, because so, I remember, sorry, go ahead.
And maybe that can change with Doug Ford as Ontario Premier. I think they've got a good relationship, but there's a real bottleneck in the relationship with Quebec.
Well, I remember the Reform days and when that new party sprang up and the frustration with then the federal PC party of Canada, and their motto was the West wants in. But now with Wexit, it's like, no, the West wants out. But so anyways, this is enlightening to suggest that, it's never really more than 30%. But what has changed with those who do want Wexit? So before they want in, now they want out. What has changed? Is it really just simply the Eastern reaction to Albertan oil?
I think there's a reality that's set in that Quebec has managed to develop a level of autonomy and also have decentralized power on a whole range of fronts because they threatened to leave. And so I think Albertan has said, well, is that what we need? Do we just need to take care of Alberta first? And so I think part of the reason Jason Kenney is under a bit of pressure, if you've looked at his poll results, is that he's not standing up to Ottawa and he's not pursuing some of the things that I think that segment of Albertans wanted him to, like collecting your own personal income tax and having your own provincial police and having your own pension plan, the things that Quebec has already done. But at the same time, you've got an established federal parliamentarian, Jay Hill, who is leading the Maverick movement, which is to try to elect MPs in the same way that the Bloc Québécois has elected MPs. So I think that you're seeing on both fronts. There's a movement at the provincial level with the Wild Rose Independence Party to try to get Jason Kenney pressured into taking some of those actions against Ottawa. But if that fails, then Jay Hill may have some success in getting a few members elected. And I think the hope is that changes the discussion. I don't know how serious that either of them are in moving straight to independence.
Right.
I really do get a strong sense that they want to take one last stab at getting this relationship to work. We've tried everything, nothing's worked. Maybe this is just one more step in trying to get that new discussion and that new dialogue going.
Well, hey, I'm no stranger to running for elected office to move an agenda forward on issues. So that's it could work out, that strategy. So in the minute we have left, we've talked about the oil and gas sector and how it's in some capacity been crippled by American and Canadian legislative action. What would it take? Again, the 45 seconds we have left, what would it take for Western Canada to actually really, truly want to remain here as part of the nation?
Well, I think in some ways we've got to meet halfway. I think we recognize the rest of the country wants us to make greater strides on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The Supreme Court just sided with the federal government on a carbon tax. And so I think that the industry has to double down and figure out how they can continue to produce and export their product, but bring a lower CO2 footprint to it. And that may be where we end up with the breakthrough. I think that conversation is really just about to begin, and hopefully it'll be receptive in the rest of the country.
Okay, Danielle Smith, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciated our conversation and insight into what's going on out west. So thank you very much.
You bet, my pleasure.
So many of us, especially those in eastern or central Canada, seem to not pay attention to some of these sentiments that grow out in the West. But the West is a very integral part of our Canadian Confederation. And if there are sentiments of Wexit, then we need to do everything we can to help address their concerns. Because after all, we are all one Canada. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.